Thank you, Simone, and I hope you can hear me okay and also see my presentation.
All good, yes.
Good. So thanks for the well. First of all, thanks for the invite to be here. It's a pleasure, and I'm really sad not to be there in person this time. And also a big thank you to Simone for setting the stage so nicely for this discussion. In my presentation, I will basically build on what Simone just outlined and dig a bit deeper into the relationship between the use of ETS revenues and the need to promote public acceptability of carbon pricing in general and ETS more specifically. As a quick note of context on why I'm here talking about this, the organization I work for, ICAP, is an organization that brings together governments around the world that get together under ICAP to basically jointly work on designing and implementing emission trading systems. So you can think of ICAP as a forum for intergovernmental discussion on emission trading systems. As such, the topic we are here to discuss today is one where we spend a lot of time and energy working on. I wanted to provide you a bit of an update on what is the state of play for the implementation of emission trading systems worldwide. And as Simone was also pointing out, this kind of policy tool gained a lot of traction over the last decade or so as a way to put a price on CO2 emissions through a market-based policy. As of today, we have 29 emission trading systems in force in different continents and different parts of the world, and about 20 more, so those in the two shades of green, that are either under development or under consideration. And I mean, this map will easily convey the kind of uptake that these policies have gained, but also the diversity of context in which they are developed and implemented. Simone covered this quite nicely, but it's always worth keeping in mind that these instruments have been around for a while. The first one was the EU ETS, which was launched all the way back in 2005. And they have evolved and they were reformed over time, which in turn, as the system functioning was refined, also generated higher prices on the back of more ambitious reforms to the systems, and on the back of these systems becoming more stringent and resilient over time. In particular, a couple of systems, such as the EU ETS and the UK ETS, have reached record levels in the last couple of years, but across the board, and as you can see on the slide, most systems have moved towards higher prices in recent years and months, which is good because it is what they are supposed to do. I mean, they are supposed to deliver a strong price signal that can incentivize emission reduction throughout the sectors they cover, but can in turn also have unintended consequences, as Simone also pointed out. In particular, if you want to map out which are the groups that are or that can be affected by carbon pricing policies, especially when carbon prices start to reach high levels, we find households that are exposed to additional expenses for energy and the fossil-intensive products they need in their daily lives. We have workers and the workforce in general that is exposed to an economic transition and potentially losses of jobs. You have local communities that might be disadvantaged in terms of fair distribution of co-benefits. These are, for example, the communities that live close to pollution hotspots, for example. And then you have the industrial sectors and in general the entities that are covered under these systems that might be put at a competitiveness disadvantage. And these issues are obviously much more exacerbated when prices go higher. On the flip side of this, and the good news, as Simone also pointed out, is that higher prices have been raising record levels of auction revenues, especially in recent years. And in total, and since auctioning first started all the way back in 2008, emission trading systems globally have raised more than 220 billion of US dollars in revenues. But it's also worth looking at how this trend evolved over time. And as you'll see on the slide, the last couple of years, so 2021 and 2022, again on the back of higher prices in some of these systems, have raised really record level of revenues, and they basically, like the last couple of years, account for more or less the more or less 50% of the overall revenues raised in time and in total. On the pie chart on the upper left side, you can also see a breakdown of 2022, and it's quite easy to see that the EU ETS, for example, accounts for the lion's share of revenues collected, and in general, systems that are obviously big in size, but that they also have high carbon prices, are the ones that raised most of the revenues. As Simone was also hinting at, revenues can be a core element that promotes the acceptability of this kind of a policy tool, both in terms of promoting public acceptability, but also in terms of promoting acceptability in the covered sectors. And it's quite important to see how these revenues that can, amount to significant budget resources are spent. Generally speaking, and oversimplifying a little bit, this slide shows the main ways that governments and ETS regulators can decide to make use of those revenues. So in some instances, they just contribute to the public budget, and they can be used to reduce taxes, or more broadly to finance the functioning of the state as any other budget source would. But in a lot of cases, and we will go into this a bit later in the presentation, ETS revenues are earmarked, and they are set aside for specific purposes. One of these, and we will see a lot of examples of this later on in the presentation, is through the creation of dedicated funds that can be aimed, for example, at funding climate action beyond what the ETS already does. And most crucially, these auction revenues can also be dedicated to providing financial assistance to disadvantaged groups and communities. And this, has to do, for example, with the support to low-income households or vulnerable communities that, again, can be close to pollution hotspots. And this use of revenues typically tends to be aimed at countering the rising energy cost, and also to ease a transition to a low-carbon economy. I'll spend a few slides here in the second half of my presentation to give you a few examples. As Simone was also hinting at, the EU ETS provides a lot of examples and best practices in this sense. I will not go into this in a lot of details. First of all, because I think that many of you will be familiar with the EU ETS already. Simone touched on this, and I think Ian later on in the panel will also provide a few examples. But I just wanted to say that the EU ETS is an interesting mix of a use of different funds that can target different purposes. So, for example, you have the Innovation Fund that is aimed at funding and promoting emerging technologies to reduce CO2 emissions. You have the Modernization Fund that is aimed at modernizing the power sector and the energy sector in 10 lower income member states. And as Simone pointing out, now that the ETS will be also expanded to cover fuels for heating and transport, you will also have a social climate fund that will be explicitly targeted to address any negative social impact that the new system might create. But again, more on this in the upcoming presentations. I also wanted to bring a few examples from other systems from different parts of the world. So There is a system out there called RGGI. It is implemented on the power sector in around 10 US states in the New England area. So that is the northeast of the United States. And what is interesting there is that from the outset and from the get-go, the RGGI emission trading systems was depicted as a cap and invest system, which means that a lot of emphasis and attention was put on the invest part of it, which has to do with the way that revenues are reinvested. And in RGGI, each single participating state decides how to invest the revenues, and overall, more or less 80% of the revenue proceeds have so far been invested in consumer benefits programs. And RGGI also puts a lot of emphasis in then communicating what concrete impact these investments had. I mean, as an example, in New Jersey, which is one of the participating states, revenues are used to basically set up a voucher program to incentivize the switch to low-emitting vehicles. In other two emission trading systems, so California and Quebec, which actually operate as a linked emission trading systems, and where under this linking agreement, the two states actually hold joint auctions. Each one of them gets to handle their respective share of auction revenues separately. In both cases, they have to do with setting up different funds that can then channel those revenues to consumers or to investment opportunities. What is interesting, for example, in California is that, again, California is a state that puts a lot of emphasis in also communicating what exactly these funds do. And, they, again, they support measures that range all the way from, again, providing incentives to purchase low emission vehicles, all the way to providing direct economic support to exposed communities. And if you go on the California Air Resource Board website, which is the ETS regulator, you can find an extensive list of all the things that are funded through ETS revenues. And if you go around in California, you will find the signs that explicitly say that a specific piece of infrastructure or a specific measure has been funded by ETS revenues. And this is also a way to communicate effectively the way that revenues are used and making sure that the public sees where this money goes. And again, this is also just to emphasize again that California makes a lot of information and communication sound bites available on how revenues are used. Moving on to New Zealand, again, New Zealand, for example, make use of what they call a climate emergency response fund that is funded from auctioning revenues again. And it's quite interesting to see what this fund does, because the fund is there basically to fund mitigation measures outside of the ETS coverage, or outside of what the ETS do by default. And if you look at the sectors targeted, so for example, transport, agriculture and forestry, and energy, these are obviously the biggest emission sources in New Zealand. So you can easily see how the fund is seen as a way to expand the mitigation impact of the ETS outside of its core effect, and by making use of the funds mobilized by auctioning and through auction revenues. Last example is Nova Scotia, a really tiny emission trading system in a relatively small Canadian province. And in turn, a system that generates a limited amount of revenues. But nevertheless, Nova Scotia also has a fund to make use of these revenues. And again, as in other examples, there's a lot of communication and stakeholder engagement that goes to how this fund is actually used. And and that underpins the use of auctioning revenues. So, for example, I mean, California has not California, Nova Scotia has a fund to do this. But what is really key to observe here is that the local communities and homeowners and citizens in general are really involved in the process that decides how the funds and the revenues proceeds are used, and that is also seen as a way to, I mean, first of all, make sure that the population sees the impact of these funds, but also that they feel at the forefront of deciding how these revenues are used. And these are just some of the examples, but you'll find many others as you look through all the 29 emission trading systems that are in operation today. I'll keep it to that. Floor goes back to Simone, but happy to dig further in the discussion. Thanks again.